Our next speaker is Benedicta Hamada. Benedicte is currently teaching in the Department of Art History and Film Studies at the Université of Montréal, where she's been since 2013. She took her PhD in the Université Paris Panthéon-Sorbonne, and most of her career so far has been devoted to working in an exploratory way on the relationship between art and environmental issues such as climate change and animal studies. So her publications have gone hand in hand with exhibitions and the accompanying curatorial supports of catalogues and so forth. And it's a pleasure to welcome you. And since I'm sure your PowerPoint is going to be absolutely stunning.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Frederic, for your invitation for being here today. So, the Anthropocene is not only the era of human domination, it's also the era of natural resilience, the result of a partnership with the cultural, the result of involuntary and spontaneous mutations and transformations, the consequences of which remain unpredictable. The Anthropocene generates the bastard, non-spectacular post-nature, the result of mistakes and abandonments, emancipation and escape, transforming the condition of beings who enslave themselves, a phenomenon that fascinates many French researchers. For instance, the philosopher Catherine Larrey seeks to rethink an ethics of nature, like with her concept of fourth nature articulated to multinaturalism. It has built a thought of codependence between the natural sciences and the social world, calling for the ongoing dualisms to be overcome. Rather than rejecting the word and concept nature, she advocates for a new, plural, and multicultural one. Rémy Beau advances an ethics of ordinary nature, resulting from agriculture and free zones, a nature apparently without aesthetic qualities, without cultural value, in which it seeks to renew the ethic of nature and the paradigm of its protection. Jean-Claude Genot is also an advocate of the wastelands and of conspicuous flora and fauna, of a local savage from whom he thinks a shared ecology. For these three researchers, there is no trial of anthropocentrism, but rather a cautious negotiation that avoids dogmatism and seeks to establish a circular, fluid thought without peremptory opinion. They influenced me to analyzing works that I will present today in this paper. All present the common point of inviting us to think of a humbler, more human relationship with nature in the emotional sense of the term, rather than thinking of it in terms of an omniscient and a universal morality. Collaborate rather than dominate. These researchers structure and think what Virginie Marie recently called interspecific diplomacy, a peaceful collaboration. The specificity of ferality offers the possibility of thinking of a nature capable of emancipation, an arrangement, and no longer just an issue of assimilation of natural species towards man. As dynamic transformation, ferality generates monsters, hybrids, whose properties escape us, but with which we must reconcile. It is not part of nature because it is a domestic species, animal or botanical, but has escaped from a cultivated, standardized, catalogued world. This emancipation has modified its properties, its genetics, which no longer respond to those of so-called natural or man-made species. Thus, the behavior of a plant or animal no longer responds to a prior programming or known natural pattern. Borrowing from both regimes, ferality confuses and thwarts dualism, enjoining researchers to acclimatize to these Frankensteins in turn. And many French researchers find in this new, wild, bastard nature the identity of a next nature whose unpredictable psyche recalls its natural origin. The difficulty comes from the species' response to their new environment, which will generate an original configuration, requiring a constantly moving thought. What this ferality does is to escape confinement. It's if such ordinary nature was the subject of a visual panorama commissioned by the French state in the early 1980s with a data mission, revealing a France marked by underdeveloped areas at the limits of the city and countryside, the iconography of ferality is still largely to be established. The feral dynamic is found in certain artistic practices that make it visible essentially in two ways: by identifying the phenomenon or by creating a favorable environment for their presence. In the first practices, artists build stories, record genealogies, point out the fortunes and miseries of botanical species. These catalogues are less a commitment than a praise of the resilience of the plants, their adaptation to the human world as well as their ability to escape it. They are epics that are then told like myths, like other artists prepare territories for spontaneous, free, libertarian colonization. They garden by forgetting the common rules, preparing the ground for disorder. The works of these artists reflect the dilemma facing ferality, that of perception by the negative, of a defeat of culture. The feral, associated with wasteland, therefore refers to failure of or loss of control. Yet philosophers and artists are working to counterbalance this public perception by inviting us to consider this ferality according to its potential, its original and spontaneous character, dynamic since it is based on exchanges of properties, its diversity, its hybridity. It is the unexpected modus operandi in eruptive condition that makes feralization the new savage. What is also exciting with this process of being wide is that it involves civil society, agriculture, the economy, the natural sciences, politics and ethics. This wideness is not the one of the wilderness, but a ferality to varying degrees reacting to each environment, more or less conducive to expansion. Until now, scientific studies are still reluctant to focus on feral cat colonies, for example, or feral botany. But their richness has been spotted by the artists who study such phenomena with humility, following protocols that do not seek to ennoble this ordinary nature, but highlights its unexpected qualities. Maria Theresa Alves, a Brazilian artist who has lived in many countries, including France, initiated her Seeds of Change project in Marseille in 1999. Invited to work on the city port area, she began a research project that resulted in an investigation and archival protocol implemented in Liverpool, Dunkirk, Bristol, and New York this year. It analyzed the ballast tanks of different port cities. The ballast is water in tanks historically used to stabilize ships in maritime trade. Emptied in ports when ships arrive before they receive their new cargo, ballast often carry dormant seeds from their places of origin and remain buried for 100 of years before germinating and growing. The artist crossed trade registers to understand the origin of some of these tropical species categorized in the ballast flora, long acclimatized to their host land, but distinct according to botanical nomenclature. Havas also collected seeds found among the stone and soil fields that had long been dumped by boats on dump sites. The project has evolved from the photographic investigation you can see here, writing the history of these sites and their flora without quality, to the floating gardens of Bristol in 2012-2016 and New York in 2018. What I appreciate about Alves' project is the way to understand this uncertain, unloved, and poorly known nature as a cultural and natural heritage, part of the history of world trade and territorial domination. This feral, displaced, adapted, without qualities nature is revealed as a hidden treasure. Havas' work responds by modest aesthetic means, following rigorous and low-key implementation protocols until it cultivates the feral. Far from being contradictory with the wilderness induced by ferality, the cultivation of his plants leads to openness and sharing, characteristics of environmental humanities, deeply hybrid, crossing disciplines, putting knowledge into circulation. This nature is not monolithic. It's a world heritage combined with a deeply local one, an ambivalence characteristic of its next nature, combining human history and natural behavior. The French artist Simon Boudvin has photographed and mapped the presence of Elentus altissima in the cities of Bagnolet and Montreuil from 2011. Since then, he has been organizing guided tours and has produced a whole system of visual archives to document the urban reality of his species, considered nowadays as invasive. The tree, native from China, was introduced to Europe in 1751 by the Jesuit and botanist Girondin Carville. It has been part of French urban landscapes since the 19th century. Although it has a limited life expectancy for a tree, 50 years, this tree of heaven, regarding the US nickname, has a very rapid growth capacity, which has earned it a certain success during urban redevelopment campaigns in Europe, a quality that is all the more remarkable because the species was also a source for food for silkworm. The textile industry of silk, therefore, has its share of responsibility in the introduction and use of Tree of Heaven, which subsequently contributed to the decoration of European cities. In recent years, the publicization of some negative specs of this plant has continued to expand on the internet, highlighting the change in the status of a plant, which has been persona non grata in many cities. Because the tree is now seen as a pest, its properties and adaptive qualities which have enabled it to colonize the planet are relegated behind a long litany of its defects. Honey with a strong smell of cat urine, unpleasant scent of its flowers, allergenic sap, wood unsuitable for carpentry, robust and invasive root system, exceptional growth, opportunism. And its new nicknames like Tree of Hell in the United States or Stinking Ash in France reflect the status of a tree that has become undesirable in many countries, allowing a botanical witch hunt. Simon Boudvin prefers to consider the former called Tree of Heaven in his immediate environment as resilient. His inventory shows the plant's ability to grow in the slightest crack and precarious conditions with unfailing resilience, but it is precisely what disturbs cities' administration, this freedom of movement and settlement, the inconvenient dimension and the pugnacity of his tree. Even after being cut off, it is able to grow again vigorously. I quote, "It is a proof of nature's power and at the same time a message. Man may be dominant, but I'm the strongest. See what happens as soon as man disappears. A message that should make us more humble, less arrogant," end of a quote, says ecologist Jean-Claude Génaud about feral flora. Moreover, such opportunism eradicates many plants is real. We must not forget by weakening our biodiversity, we have made our ecosystems permeable to invaders, and that the plant alone cannot be held responsible. It has become the scapegoat for all human interference. By making the intruder visible, the artist recalls his historical past, the reasons for his presence on French soil, but disclaims until its categorization as invasive, weaving in undertext a history not only botanical but also geopolitical, economic, and social of the intruder. Thus, in a little over a century, art has evolved from a representation of exotic plants for their aesthetic qualities, as in Claude Monet's work, to a more global, highly political and critical portrait of this common species. Simon Boudvin demonstrates the ever-growing interest in these botanical liberties that threaten public order. As Jean-Claude Génaud wrote, "New nature is emerging. It bears no resemblance to what we've known so far and may surprise us," end of a quote. This human nature is the exploration ground for many artists who have abandoned wilderness. Laurence Tercia, a French artist, works actually in the field, drawing the attention of urban to an unexpected wealth usually experienced as undesirable and understood as a sign of negligent governance. It is above all about trying to fix nature in a precise and idealized state, like in a garden, in a perfectly stable climate. We understand how much this conception can only lead into a war. Laurent Cercia does the opposite. He has repeatedly undertaken to raise public awareness of the value of ruderal species and weeds. In the same way that Baudouin applied an inventory and documentation logic to make the presence of a single species visible in an urban environment, Cercia opted in Les Rudérales and Via Botanica, two interventions carried out in Montmarsan in 2010, for an exhaustive introspection of their urban network. First, one reports in the form of a photographic herbarium, a patient street survey in search of the spontaneous gardens that bloom in the cracks of the streets. Cercia documents and informs about the great biodiversity of the urban environment and its richness in an information and evaluation campaign. Poppy planting, Viper bugloss, mallow, soft thistle, greater celandine. These are some of the hundreds of species identified that question the street cleaning campaigns conducted by towns against these undesirable. Cercia has continued his approach by renaming some streets in Montmarsan after the name of his wild plants with medicinal properties. Accompanied by an ethnobotanist, the artist continues his prospecting by initiating the public through workshops and exhibitions to the richness of what he calls these sidewalk gardens, for which a whole education arsenal has been put in place to counter botanical intolerance. Finally, in 2015, it was in Bordeaux that he set up closed kiosks, boxes for artificial replicas of 13 ruderal species, systematically tracked down by weeds, killers, and city teams. Laying pigweed, Canadian fleabane, rooted porcelain are among the species made precious by the device of shimmering surfaces that serves as their soil. With a some beyond the verge of extinction due to the relentless efforts of city to eradicate their presence, asked the artist. By listing and reporting these species, artists transform them into open access resources, free of the knowledge, offering direct pedagogy and green medicine, bringing communities together in a desire for freedom. Paradoxically, the catalogs they constitute do not lock nature into a system, do not transform it into a resource to be exploited according to a liberal logic. They potentiate its freedom, the spirit of dissent. They offer the urbans the opportunity to reconnect with a natural rhythm, with the experience of a social and ecological ecosystem, a pragmatic ecosystem, which crosses geopolitical realities, knowledge from post-colonial studies that now exploit fields other than those of repair, those of a never more complex history. In Nantes in 2014, an anonymous intervention has consisted in tagging the weeds with a medicinal name, restoring their botanical identity and their full nutritional and therapeutic potential. These initiatives are in line with the re-evaluation of folk ecology, this traditional ecological knowledge based on indigenous ecological culture, which seeks to divert intellectual domination from vernacular knowledge by operating on a horizontal transmission, the formation of the eco-citizen, and by returning to ancestral and traditional knowledge. Since 1992, Lois Weinberger has been interested in the same resources, these ruderal species that grow on our urban ruins and leftovers, but not for their botanical and pharmaceutical properties. This led to a very special sequestration in the public space of the University of Political and Social Sciences in Innsbruck in 1998. In a metal structure, you can see here, with bars with 40 meters long, these opportunists have flourished. They came to colonize this empty space. They are hunted everywhere else because they disturb urban law and order, but here they are protected. Weinberger favors these species that settle where they wish, without distinction of class. They also have been greening Weinberger's portable garden since 1994, modest compositions that grow as they can in shopping bag, plastic buckets, the very symbol of the humblest migrations. At a time when Europe is seeking to barricade itself against the influx of migrants, these traveling plants which embody carelessness, opportunism, disorder, and even anarchy, fascinate Weinberger and symbolize a mixed botanical Europe. Society's treatment of plants is a mirror image of itself, says Weinberger. The Austrian is also a precursor in the rejection of a tyranny of taxonomy and its indexing for use, all without exercising any authority of knowledge or imposing a lesson in morality worthy of representing her horizontal ecology. As Jean-Claude Génaud said, quote, there is a jumble of opinions hostile to aliens, fear of the invader, a certain idea of an intact, pure, and unchanging nature, a nostalgia for nature in the past without invasive, fear of an unknown future, anguish of a nature that has become uncontrollable. But among these opinions, very few involve man. The invasive is the origin of evil, and not the consequence of carelessness of man. End of a quote. It's not surprising then that the city of Salzburg has not made burning and walking sustainable, nor broken asphalt. An 8 by 8 meter zone was fractured asphalt was offered by Weinbergers to the rurals invasive and weeds. The appearance of disorder has undoubtedly embarrassed the city council, but above all, the admission of powerlessness in face of such casual nature, which sets a bad example of freedom, has probably been the most aggravating factor. What Weinberger's works reveal is our exteriority to this feral, unpredictable nature, the discomfort of societies to tolerate these free bodies. This moving botany puts our relationship with the presence of nature in the city into crisis, as it is usually assigned to green spaces. Weinberger, as a radical gardener, learns to de-garden, to abandon the principles of botanical pleasures, the values that have stuck to plants for centuries, to free them from their inferiority to man. For a long time, gardening was synonymous with controlling nature, controlling its impulses, enslaving it to the needs of humanity. Nourishing nature and healing nature coexisted in a regulated and sequenced space to serve the interest of man. The garden could also become a political instrument by acclimatizing species to represent colonial power as well as to demonstrate economic intelligence. In recent decades, gardening has taken an almost opposite path, embodying the liberation from capitalism, or even a certain libertarianism and anarchy, symbolizing a form of freedom instead of planning natural presence in ever more constraining and normalized spaces. Degardening would then be a more accurate term, as weed studies and spontaneous vegetative growth are multiplying. A liberation, a green sedition, as it to thwart the current botanical withdrawal of nations. This shameless protectionism pegged to a fantasy of indigenous authenticity that is currently raging across countries and is leading administration to ban certain species with unparalleled verbal violence. Such a radical gardener as Lois Weinberger maintains a botanical dissidence that thinks of a garden in an open, deeply dynamic process of deregulation, where man is sought to build an ideal picture in flowers and trees. This ideal picture today is that of a nature in motion, which constantly escapes, circumvents rules, thwarts patterns and capitalism, frees itself from decency. The city is not usually perceived as a natural resource, with nature occupying an index place most often framed by park and garden fences. When it thrives outside these beacons, it is discounted, considered a weed, and ignoring its medicinal potential in its history, often linked to the colonial past. The examples of Maria Theresa Alves, Laurence Cercia, Lois Weinberger, and Simon Boudvin shows different integrations of botanical factors in the research on undergrowth spaces. By lighting the form of a guided tour, map, or guide, by disseminating data, by offering moments of community around a natural reality that is not that of an ideal nature, they encourage the imagination of our own dissidents in relation to a normalized urban world. Feralization is becoming our new savage, our next nature. Today, the Anthropocene leads researchers and artists in different directions, not simply in search of illustrations of the era, but to construct an imaginary, its a history borrowing from the hybrid dynamics of a phenomenon. The nature of the Anthropocene cannot be univocal, and must welcome this unstable ferality that feeds on tolerance and multifactorial knowledge in constant redefinition, without certainty, for a science more speculative than assertive. Thank you.